I had a bad feeling about my own home, so I pretended to go on vacation, but I never left the city. Instead, I rented a run-down room across the street to watch my front door. While I was spying from behind a dirty curtain, an elderly neighbor took me by the hand and whispered 4 words that made my blood run cold. "At midnight, you will see." When midnight came, I fainted from what I saw. My name is Reginald Carter. I am 71 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought I was losing my mind. But I wasn't losing my mind, I was losing my life. If you are watching this, please like and subscribe, because what I am about to tell you might just save your own life one day. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because I want to know how far my warning has traveled. It started on a Tuesday morning at the breakfast table. The smell of bacon usually made me hungry, but lately the mere scent of food made my stomach turn. My hands were trembling as I tried to lift my coffee cup. I had been a structural engineer for 40 years, building bridges that could withstand hurricanes, yet now I could barely hold a ceramic mug without spilling. Blake, my son-in-law, walked into the dining room. He did not say good morning. He never really looked me in the eye. He looked through me like I was a piece of old furniture he wanted to throw out but couldn't lift. He tossed a blue envelope onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right next to my trembling hand. "You are going to Florida tomorrow, Pop." He didn't ask. He didn't suggest. He ordered. I looked up at him. Blake was 38 years old, white, with that confident smile of a man who has never had to work for anything in his life. He called himself an entrepreneur, but in 5 years of marriage to my daughter Nia, I had never seen him actually work. He just spent. He spent Nia's salary, and lately he had been spending my patience. "Florida," I asked, my voice sounding weak and raspy. "Why would I go to Florida?" "Because you need rest," Blake said, pouring himself a glass of orange juice from my refrigerator. "Dr. Evans said your little stroke last week was a warning sign. The humidity will be good for your joints. I booked you into a nice assisted living resort. One-way ticket. First class." I looked at the ticket. One way. He wasn't sending me on vacation. He was shipping me out. I looked at Nia. My beautiful daughter sat across from me, staring into her bowl of oatmeal. She wouldn't look at me. She knew. She knew this was an eviction, not a vacation. "Nia," I said softly, "do you agree with this?" She flinched. It was a small movement, but I saw it. She finally looked up and her eyes were filled with tears she was trying to hold back. "Daddy, it is for your own good," she said, but her voice sounded rehearsed, like lines from a bad play. "Blake says you need professional care. We can't watch you 24/7. You are getting confused, Daddy. You forgot to turn off the stove yesterday." I hadn't forgotten. I knew I hadn't. I had been an engineer. Precision was my life. But lately things were happening. Keys going missing, the stove being left on, my wallet appearing in the refrigerator, and this sickness. This constant dizziness and nausea that Dr. Evans, Blake's friend from the golf club, dismissed as old age. "Fine," I said. "I will go." The relief on Blake's face was instantaneous and insulting. He smiled and patted my shoulder with a heavy, condescending hand. "That is a good boy, Pop. You pack your bags. The car will be here at 8 a.m. I went to my room, but I didn't pack for Florida. I packed for a war. The next morning, I played my part. I let Blake load my suitcases into the trunk of the luxury sedan he had ordered. He hugged me, and it felt like being squeezed by a python. "Don't worry about the house, Pop," he said, grinning. "We will take good care of it." I bet you will, I thought. I got into the car and watched them wave from the porch of my brownstone. My grandfather bought this land. My father built the foundation. I restored it brick by brick. It was worth millions now in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. And Blake looked at it not like a home, but like a winning lottery ticket. As soon as the car turned the corner and we were out of sight, I leaned forward to the driver. "Change of plans," I said. I held up a $100 bill. "Do not take me to the airport. Take me to 4th Street. The driver looked confused, but money talks. He turned the car around. 4th Street ran directly parallel to my street. The back of the buildings on 4th Street faced the front of my building. I had booked a room on Airbnb using an old email address Blake didn't know about. The car stopped in front of a crumbling building with peeling paint. It was a stark contrast to my pristine brownstone just 1 block over. I dragged my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs, my heart hammering in my chest, my legs feeling like lead. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and damp carpet. It was disgusting, but it had one redeeming quality: the window. I walked to the window and pulled back the greasy curtain. There it was, my house, my life. From this angle I could see the front door, the living room windows, and the master bedroom balcony. I opened my suitcase and took out the only thing that really mattered: my military-grade binoculars from my days surveying bridge sites. I pulled up a chair and I waited. For hours, nothing happened. The house was quiet, but I had a feeling in my gut, a feeling I hadn't had since I was walking inspection lines on suspension bridges in high winds. The structure was unsound. Something was about to snap. Around 4 in the afternoon, I saw movement in the hallway of the tenement building I was in. I cracked my door open to get some air because the room was stifling. Standing there was Mrs. Higgins. She was 75 years old, sharp as a tack, and had lived in this neighborhood since before it was trendy. She knew everything and everyone. She was holding a bag of groceries. She looked at me. She didn't look surprised. She didn't ask why Reginald Carter, the owner of the finest house on the block, was hiding in a dump like this. She just nodded. "I knew you weren't stupid, Reggie," she said, her voice rough like sandpaper. "Mrs. Higgins," I started to explain, but she cut me off. "Save your breath. You look terrible. Your skin is gray." "I feel terrible," I admitted, leaning against the doorframe. She walked over to me and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She pressed something cold and jagged into my palm. I looked down. It was a rusty iron key. "That opens the old service gate in your back alley," she whispered. "The one your wife Beatrice, God rest her soul, used to use for the garden. Why are you giving me this, Mrs. Higgins?" She looked left, then right, down the empty hallway, then leaned in close. Her eyes were full of a fear I had never seen in her before. "Because you need to see. You need to get close. Your dog Buster didn't die of old age last week, Reggie. And you aren't sick from old age either." My blood ran cold. Buster, my German shepherd, had died suddenly 3 days ago. Blake said his heart just gave out. "What do you know?" I demanded, gripping her arm. She pulled away gently. "I can't say it here. Walls have ears, and that son-in-law of yours has eyes everywhere. But you take that key. Go to the back garden tonight. Wait in the hydrangeas." She started to walk away, then stopped and looked back. "At midnight, Reggie. At midnight you will see and you will understand everything, and God help you when you do." She disappeared into her apartment, leaving me standing in the hallway with a rusty key and a heart filled with terror. I went back to my window and raised my binoculars. The sun was setting. The streetlights flickered on. My house looked peaceful. Warm golden light spilled from the living room windows. It looked like the perfect American home. But as the hours ticked by, I watched the transformation. At 9 p.m., a van pulled up. Men in black t-shirts got out carrying large, heavy cases. They weren't moving furniture. They were bringing equipment in. At 10 p.m., the luxury cars started arriving. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys. They parked all along the street, blocking fire hydrants and driveways. I watched Blake open the front door. He wasn't wearing his usual casual clothes. He was wearing a tuxedo. He greeted the men getting out of the cars with handshakes and backslaps. He looked like the owner of the world. And then I saw Nia. My heart broke. She was standing by the door wearing a dress that was far too short, holding a tray of drinks. She wasn't greeting guests as a hostess. She was working. I looked at the clock. 11:30. Mrs. Higgins' words echoed in my mind. "At midnight you will see." I grabbed the rusty key. I grabbed my binoculars. I left the apartment and ran down the stairs, ignoring the dizziness, ignoring the pain in my joints. I crossed the dark alleyway that separated our streets. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely fit the key into the lock of the old iron gate covered in ivy. It groaned and clicked. I slipped inside my own backyard. I crept through the shadows, moving toward the house I had built with my own money and sweat. I hid in the thick hydrangea bushes just under the living room window. The music was loud now, thumping through the glass. I raised myself up slowly, inch by inch, until I could see through the gap in the velvet curtains. I looked inside and my breath stopped. My living room was gone. The furniture my wife and I had collected for 30 years was pushed against the walls or gone entirely. In the center of the room were green felt tables, roulette wheels, card tables, stacks of chips. It was a casino, A high-stakes illegal casino operating right in my living room. Smoke filled the air. Men were shouting and laughing, throwing stacks of cash onto my antique coffee table. But that wasn't what made me faint. I shifted my gaze to the fireplace. Above the mantel, there had always been a large oil painting of my late wife Beatrice. It was my most prized possession. The painting was gone. In its place was a large digital screen displaying odds and bets, and leaning against the fireplace waiting to be used as firewood was the frame of Beatrice's portrait. The canvas had been ripped out. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like a knife twisting. My vision blurred. The world tilted sideways. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Blake standing on a chair holding up my grandfather's gold pocket watch, auctioning it off to a man with a scar on his face. And then I hit the ground. I crouched there in the dirt behind the hydrangea bushes, and my knees popped with a sound that seemed loud enough to wake the dead. But nobody heard me because the noise coming from my house was deafening. It wasn't just music, it was a physical force shaking the very foundation I had poured with my own hands 40 years ago. The bass thumped against my chest, matching the frantic rhythm of my heart. I looked at the driveway and the street beyond. It looked like a luxury car dealership had exploded on my front lawn. There were Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and customized sports cars parked on the grass, destroying the landscaping Beatrice had tended to for decades. These weren't the cars of friends or neighbors. These were the cars of predators, men who had so much money they didn't care whose lawn they ruined. I crept closer to the window, my breath forming small clouds in the cold night air. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap just wide enough for me to see the nightmare unfolding inside. My living room, the place where I had taught Nia to read, the place where Beatrice and I had danced on our anniversaries, was gone. In its place was a den of vice that looked like it belonged in a movie about gangsters. The air inside was thick with cigar smoke hanging like a blue fog over the green felt tables. I saw men I didn't recognize, men with cold eyes and expensive suits throwing chips onto the tables. They were drinking from my crystal glasses, the ones we saved for Christmas, and ashing their cigars on my hardwood floors. I watched a man spill red wine on the Persian rug Beatrice had inherited from her mother. He didn't even look down, he just laughed and kept betting. The disrespect was physical. It felt like they were spitting on my life. I wanted to scream, I wanted to break the glass and storm in there, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen by the sheer magnitude of the violation. This wasn't a party. This was an invasion. And the general leading the charge was the man I had welcomed into my family. I shifted my position, trying to get a better view of the fireplace, and what I saw next nearly stopped my heart completely. The portrait of Beatrice. My beautiful Beatrice. It wasn't just gone from the wall. It was lying in the fireplace. They hadn't lit the fire yet, but the canvas was torn right down the middle of her face. It looked like someone had put a foot through it. Seeing her smile ripped apart like that hurt more than any physical blow. It was a message. It said that the past didn't matter. It said that respect for the dead didn't exist in this house anymore. Then I saw Blake. He wasn't just hosting. He was performing. He was standing on top of my dining room table, the solid oak table where we had shared Thanksgiving dinners for 30 years. He was holding something up to the light, a gold object that glinted under the chandelier. I squinted through my binoculars and a gasp got stuck in my throat. It was my collection of vintage pocket watches. My grandfather had given me the first one when I graduated engineering school. I had spent a lifetime collecting them, restoring them, keeping them safe for the next generation. And there was Blake auctioning them off like cheap trinkets at a flea market. I could see his mouth moving fast, shouting numbers, whipping the crowd of gamblers into a frenzy. A man in the front row threw a stack of cash at Blake's feet, and Blake kicked the money into a pile, laughing like a maniac. He tossed my grandfather's watch to the man who caught it carelessly and shoved it into his pocket without even looking at the craftsmanship. Blake looked triumphant. He looked like a king in a castle he hadn't built, spending treasure he hadn't earned. He was selling my legacy piece by piece to pay for his ego. But the worst was yet to come. I saw movement near the kitchen door and my eyes shifted. A woman walked out carrying a tray of high-end liquor bottles. For a second, I didn't recognize her. She was wearing a dress so short it barely covered her hips, a skimpy red thing that looked cheap and degrading. She had heavy makeup on, trying to hide the exhaustion in her eyes. It was Nia, my daughter, the girl I had put through college, the woman who was a qualified architect. She wasn't an architect tonight. She was a waitress, a servant in her own father's house. I watched a man grab her arm as she passed by. He whispered something in her ear and laughed. Nia didn't slap him. She didn't pull away. She forced a smile, a terrible, broken smile, and poured him a drink. Seeing that smile broke me. It was the smile of someone who had given up, someone who had been beaten down until they had no dignity left. Blake had reduced my brilliant, strong daughter to a prop in his twisted game. He had stripped her of her pride, just as he had stripped my house of its memories. The rage rose up in my throat, bitter and hot, like bile. I started to stand up. I didn't care if I was old. I didn't care if I was outnumbered. I was going to kill him. But as I tried to rise, a sudden explosion of pain detonated in my chest. It wasn't like anything I had felt before. It wasn't just a heart attack. It felt like my blood had turned to acid. The dizziness that Dr. Evans had dismissed as old age came back with the force of a tidal wave. My vision blurred violently, turning the bright lights of the casino into streaks of neon fire. My legs gave out instantly. I collapsed backward, crashing into the thicket of rose bushes Beatrice had planted along the wall. The thorns tore through my shirt, digging into my skin like 100 tiny knives, but I couldn't feel the sting. All I could feel was the crushing weight on my chest and the fire in my veins. The poison. I realized it then with a clarity that was terrifying. I wasn't sick. I was being poisoned. The nausea, the weakness, the tremors, it was all part of the plan. And tonight the shock had accelerated it. I lay there tangled in the thorns, blood seeping from the scratches on my arms and face. I couldn't move my limbs, my body was shutting down. But my eyes refused to close. They were locked on that window, staring into the hell that my home had become. I could still see Blake laughing on the table. I could still see Nia's dead smile. I tried to shout, but only a gurgle of blood and saliva came out. I was dying in the dirt outside my own house while the man who killed me sold my life to strangers. The darkness began to creep in from the edges of my vision, but I fought it. I had to see. I had to remember. Because if I survived this, I would make sure he paid for every single thing he had broken tonight. I woke up gasping for air like a man surfacing from a deep dive. My chest felt bruised and heavy, and my head was pounding with a rhythm that matched the ticking clock on the wall. I wasn't in the dirt anymore. I was lying on a floral sofa that smelled of lavender and old dust. Mrs. Higgins was sitting in her rocking chair watching me with eyes that had seen too much history to be surprised by cruelty. She didn't ask how I felt. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and tossed a small amber glass bottle onto the coffee table. It spun and stopped right in front of my face. It had no label, just a residue of glue where one used to be. I looked at it confused, my vision still swimming. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. "I pulled it out of your kitchen trash 2 days ago," she said, her voice calm and terrifying. "I saw that son-in-law of yours scraping the label off before he threw it away deep in the bin. I didn't think much of it until I saw you shaking like a leaf in the hallway yesterday. It is arsenic, Reggie. Low dose. Enough to make your hands shake so bad you can't sign a check. Enough to make you confused so you think you are losing your mind. But not enough to kill you quick. He wants you slow, Reggie. He wants you weak so you can't fight back when he takes the deed." I stared at the bottle. The sickness, the dizziness, the tremors that Dr. Evans said were just part of aging. It wasn't age, it was murder in slow motion. I was living proof of a crime in progress. Rage flooded my system, pushing out the fear. I tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. I reached for my pocket, patting my jacket for my phone. "I have to call the police," I said, my voice rising. "I have to tell them what he is doing. He is running a casino in my house. He is poisoning me." I started to dial 911, but Mrs. Higgins stood up faster than I thought possible for a woman her age. She slapped my hand down and then she slapped my cheek. It wasn't hard, but it was sharp enough to snap my focus back to her. "Stop it," she hissed. "Think Reggie used that engineer brain of yours. You call the police now and what happens? They show up and see a black man claiming his white businessman's son-in-law is poisoning him with no proof but an old lady's word and a bottle from the trash. They see a man who looks sick, confused, and erratic. Blake will say you are senile. He will say you are having an episode. He will say he threw out an old bottle of cough syrup. He will hide that bottle and clear out that casino before the squad car even parks. You are a confused old black man in their eyes, and he is a successful white entrepreneur. You lose that fight every time. And once the police leave, he will know you know. He won't wait anymore. He will finish the job tonight. You need proof. You need to catch him with his hand in the jar. You need to go back in there and play the game better than him. You are alive, Reggie, which means you still have a move to make." She was right. The bitter taste of truth was harder to swallow than the poison. I spent the next few hours regaining my strength, drinking the strong black coffee Mrs. Higgins brewed and eating dry toast to settle my stomach. At exactly 7 a.m., I walked across the street. The sun was shining on my brownstone as if the night before had never happened. The luxury cars were gone. The street was quiet. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I expected to smell stale smoke and spilled alcohol. Instead, the air was thick with the chemical sting of industrial bleach. It burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. The house was spotless. The green felt tables were gone. The furniture was back in place, pushed to their exact original spots. Even the portrait of Beatrice was back over the mantel, though I could see a faint line where they had taped the canvas back together from the behind. It was a perfect illusion. I walked into the kitchen, Blake and Nia were sitting at the island eating pancakes and drinking orange juice. The domestic scene was so normal, it was terrifying. Blake looked up and his fork froze halfway to his mouth. For a split second, I saw the panic in his eyes, the sheer terror of seeing a ghost he thought was halfway to Florida. But then the mask slipped back on. Poppy stammered, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You are back. We thought you were on the plane. We missed you so much we were just cleaning up to keep busy." I gripped the handle of my suitcase so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked at the man who had auctioned off my life hours ago. I looked at the daughter who had served drinks to strangers in my home. I forced my face into a mask of confusion and fatigue. I missed my flight. I lied my voice flat and cold. And I forgot my heart medication. I need to rest. I walked past them towards my bedroom, leaving them standing in the kitchen, terrified of the man they failed to kill. The silver spoon hit the ceramic tile with a violence that made everyone jump. It spun on the floor, a silver blur of guilt, before coming to a rest at Blake's feet. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto a dock. The arrogance I had seen last night, the king standing on the table auctioning my life away, was gone. In its place was raw panic. "Pop," he stammered, his voice cracking in a way that would have been pathetic if he wasn't trying to kill me. "You are back. We didn't expect you. I mean, we are so happy you are here. We missed you. We were just saying how empty the house felt without you." His eyes were darting around the room, scanning for anything they might have missed during their frantic cleanup. I looked at Nia. She was studying her orange juice like it contained the secrets of the universe, refusing to meet my gaze. She looked exhausted, her makeup applied heavily to cover the dark circles from a night of serving drinks to gangsters. The smell of industrial bleach was still burning my nostrils, masking the scent of expensive cigars and cheap perfume. But to them, I was just a senile old man who should have been halfway to Florida. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why there were scratch marks on the hardwood floor or why the furniture was slightly out of alignment. I just stared at Blake until he looked away. "I forgot my heart medication," I said. My voice was flat, cold, and empty of any fatherly warmth. It was the only lie I could think of that would justify my return and reinforce their belief that I was weak. Blake let out a breath he had been holding. Oh, right. Of course, Pop. Your heart. We wouldn't want you to be without that. We were just cleaning up. Deep cleaning. You know how dust settles in these old places?" He was sweating. I could see the beads forming on his upper lip. He was terrified that I had seen something, but he was trying to convince himself that I was just a confused old man who turned the taxi around. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I walked past him, my shoulder brushing against his arm. He flinched as if he expected me to strike him. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to wrap my hands around his neck and squeeze until the truth came out. But I kept walking. I had to see the damage. I had to see what else they had taken from me. I walked down the hallway and my legs felt heavy, not from age, but from the burden of carrying this hatred. The hallway looked normal to a stranger, but I built this house. I knew every inch of it. I knew how the floorboards creaked and how the light hit the walls. The family photos on the wall were tilted just a fraction of a degree to the left. They had been taken down and put back up in a hurry. I reached my bedroom door. My sanctuary. The place where Beatrice and I had whispered our secrets in the dark and planned our future. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was freezing. The window was open, likely to air out the smoke from whatever they had been doing in here. The bed was made with military precision, too perfect, too tight. The air smelled of unfamiliar cologne. Blake had been in here. He had been rooting through my life, violating my privacy in the one space that was supposed to be mine alone. I walked over to the closet. My clothes were pushed to the side. Boxes of old letters were overturned. They hadn't even tried to be careful in here. They thought I was gone for good. They thought they had time to stage the room later. I went straight to the large oil painting of the Brooklyn Bridge that hung on the far wall. It was a painting Beatrice had bought me for our 10th anniversary because she knew how much I loved the engineering of it. I gripped the frame and swung it open. Behind it was my wall safe. It wasn't locked. The digital keypad had been drilled through a crude and violent job that ruined the mechanism. The door hung open like a broken jaw. I looked inside and felt a hollow ache in my chest. Empty. The deed to the house, the life insurance policies, the bonds I had bought for Naya's future children. Everything was gone. They hadn't just thrown a party. They had liquidated me. They had stripped the meat from the bone. I ran my hand along the cold metal of the empty safe. This was why they needed me gone. This was why they needed me declared incompetent. They had the papers, but they couldn't use them until they got rid of me. They had stolen my legacy, and now they were just waiting for my heart to stop so they could cash it in. I closed the safe and put the painting back. I didn't have time to grieve the loss of papers. Papers could be replaced. My life could not. I walked into the master bathroom and locked the door behind me. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. I turned on the faucet full blast, letting the water roar into the basin. It was an old trick I learned on construction sites to drown out conversations and confuse listening devices. I sat on the edge of the tub and pulled out my phone. My hands, which had been shaking since yesterday, were suddenly steady. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an engineer, and I had a structural failure to fix. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't used in 10 years. Tyrell. We had worked together on the I-95 bridge project. He wasn't just a structural specialist. He was a paranoid genius who knew everything about surveillance. He was the kind of man who could bug a birdhouse from 3 blocks away. I typed a message, my thumbs moving fast. Code red. Structure compromised. I need eyes and ears. Full package. Meet me at the park bench by the duck pond. 1 hour. I hit send and deleted the message immediately. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The eyes staring back weren't the tired eyes of an old man ready for a nursing home. They were the hard, cold eyes of a man who was about to bring the whole house down. I dried my face, unlocked the door, and walked back out into the lion's den. I had an hour to get out of the house without raising suspicion. I had to play the part. I had to be the confused, sick old man one last time before I became their worst nightmare. I grabbed my chest, let out a small wheeze, and shuffled toward the kitchen where my executioners were waiting. I walked back into the house, clutching a small paper bag from the pharmacy, which was my cover for meeting Tyrell. Inside the bag, hidden under a box of aspirin, were 3 tiny devices that looked exactly like standard Phillips head screws. Tyrell had come through. I put on my best performance of a shuffling, confused old man because nobody suspects the elderly of espionage. I wandered into the living room, muttering about looking for my reading glasses while my hand slipped into my pocket. Blake was on the patio smoking a cigar with his back to the glass, so I had a window of opportunity. I leaned against the doorframe of the kitchen and swapped a screw on the light switch plate. It took 4 seconds. 1 down. I shuffled to the living room, running my hand along the bookshelf, feigning balance issues. I swapped a screw on the mounting bracket of the flat-screen TV. 2 down. The last one was the most dangerous. I needed eyes in the hallway right outside their bedroom. It was high up on the smoke detector. I dragged a dining chair over and stood on it, wheezing loudly in case they heard me, so I could claim I was trying to change a battery. My hands were steady as I drove the camera screw into the plastic casing. By the time Blake came back inside, smelling of expensive tobacco, I was sitting in my recliner, panting slightly, with the newspaper upside down in my lap. I had eyes everywhere. I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door, engaging the deadbolt I had installed years ago. I pulled out the tablet Tyrell had synced to the cameras and put on my noise-canceling headphones. The screen flickered to life, and the clarity was terrifying. I could see the grain of wood on the kitchen table and the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Blake walked into the frame. He was pacing, holding his phone to his ear, his face twisted in a snarl I had never seen when he looked at me directly. He was talking to someone named Marcus, probably the loan shark Tyrell had warned me about. I turned up the volume, and the audio was crisp enough to hear his heavy breathing. I heard him say words that will haunt me until I die. "This old black man is tough like leather," he hissed into the phone using a slur that made my fist clench automatically. I thought he was on the plane, but he came back like a bad penny. "No, I cannot sell the house yet. I need his signature or a death certificate. Don't worry, Marcus, I am increasing the dose starting tonight. He won't survive the week." I gripped the edge of my desk so hard the wood groaned. He wasn't just talking about money, he was talking about extermination. Blake continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my skin crawl. "Once his brain turns to mush, I am dumping him in that state-run facility in the Glades, the one with the rat problem and the health code violations. It is the cheapest one in the state. He won't last a month there." He laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. He looked right at the camera I had installed in the light switch, unknowingly staring into the eyes of the man he planned to murder. Then Naya walked into the kitchen. My heart leaped for a second. I wanted her to scream at him. I wanted her to call the police. I wanted my little girl to defend her father against this monster. Blake hung up the phone and looked at her. He told her everything. He told her about the increased poison, about the nursing home, about the timeline. I waited for her outrage. I waited for her to slap him. Instead, she just sighed and leaned against the counter looking tired. "Blake, honey," she said, her voice soft and pleading. "Just please be gentle with him. Do it fast. I do not want Daddy to be in pain. I just want him gone so we can finally start our lives. I do not want to watch him suffer. I just want him out of the way." I ripped the headphones off my head and threw them onto the bed. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the poison this time. It was the knife in my back. My daughter. The girl I taught to ride a bike. The woman I walked down the aisle. She didn't want to save me. She just didn't want to feel guilty about watching me die. That sentence killed Reginald Carter, the father. The man sitting in that chair now was someone else entirely. I wiped my face, but my eyes were dry. I didn't have any tears left for them. The psychological warfare began before I even had my morning coffee. I woke up reaching for my glasses on the nightstand, the same spot I had placed them every night for 20 years. My hand patted empty wood. I sat up, blinking against the blurry room, feeling that first spike of panic. I spent 20 minutes crawling on my hands and knees, patting the carpet, checking under the bed, feeling humiliatingly helpless. Blake walked in, holding them by the temple piece, twirling them like a toy. "Pop, you left these in the refrigerator again," he said, shaking his head with a look of practiced pity. "I know I didn't. I never go to the fridge at night." But I took them with a trembling hand and thanked him, because that is what a confused old man would do. It didn't stop there. My wallet vanished from my back pocket and reappeared in the bathroom sink, soaking wet. My heart medication was missing from the medicine cabinet, and I found it inside a box of cereal in the pantry. Every time I turned around, Blake was there, looming over me, asking, "Pop, are you okay? You seem so confused lately." He was trying to break my mind, trying to make me doubt my own reality, so that when he told the world I was crazy, I would be halfway to believing it myself. Then came the cold. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when I started to shiver violently. The air coming from the vents wasn't just cool, it was Arctic. I checked the thermostat on the wall. It was set to 60 degrees. I turned it up to 72, but 10 minutes later it was back down to 60. Blake walked in wearing a t-shirt, looking at me wrapped in 3 wool blankets, my teeth chattering. "Pop, why are you shaking? It is 80 degrees outside," he said, smirking. "Are you getting sick again?" He wanted me weak. He wanted me to look frail and broken, so when he told people I was losing it, they would believe him without question. He was gaslighting me, systematically erasing my confidence in my own senses. I knew I had to escalate. If he wanted a senile old man, I would give him a performance that would make him think he had won the lottery. I waited until late afternoon, when the sun was casting long shadows across the living room floor. Blake was in the kitchen making himself a drink, his back to me, but I knew he was listening. I sat in my rocking chair, the one Beatrice used to knit in, and I started talking to the empty space next to me. "Beatrice, honey, I told you to wear the blue dress." I whispered, my voice soft and affectionate. I laughed gently, reaching out to stroke the air as if touching a cheek. I heard the clink of glass in the kitchen stop. Blake walked to the doorway, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you talking to, Pop?" he he asked, his voice tight with suspicion. I looked at him with vacant, glassy eyes staring right through him. "Your mother," I said, smiling with a terrifying serenity. "She is right here, son." "Cannot you see her? She says you look tired." Blake turned pale. He looked at the empty chair and then back at me. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He thought the poison was finally rotting my brain. He thought the arsenic was making me hallucinate. But I had one more card to play, a card so humiliating I knew no man would fake it unless he had no pride left. I filled a small water bottle from the bathroom tap and hid it in my pocket uncapped. I walked into the hallway where Blake was standing, still looking at the empty chair. I stopped mid-stride, squeezed the bottle in my pocket, and let the warm water soak the front of my trousers. I looked down at the dark stains spreading on my beige pants and then looked up at Blake with sheer terror and shame. I had an accident," I stammered, letting my chin quiver. "I didn't feel it coming, son. I am sorry. I am so sorry." The look of disgust on Blake's face was instantaneous and absolute. He stepped back as if I were contagious, shielding his expensive shoes from the imaginary urine. "Oh God, Pop," he groaned, covering his nose even though it was just water. "That is disgusting. Go change. Just go change right now." He didn't offer to help. He didn't show an ounce of compassion or concern for his father-in-law. He just turned around and pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. I retreated to my room, walking with the shuffle of a broken man. But as soon as I closed the door, I pressed my ear against the wood. I heard him dialing frantically. "Dr. Evans, it is Blake," he said, his voice urgent and triumphant. "You need to come tomorrow. The old man is gone. Completely gone. He is hallucinating, talking to dead people, wetting himself in the hallway. He cannot take care of himself anymore. We need those papers signed now. Tomorrow morning. Yes, I will pay double. Just get here." I leaned against the doorframe and smiled a cold, hard smile. He had swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. He thought he was winning. He thought I was broken. He didn't know he had just invited a witness to his own destruction. Tomorrow wasn't going to be my end. It was going to be the beginning of his. He was bringing a doctor into a house rigged with cameras to examine a man who was sharper than he had ever been. He was digging his own grave and handing me the shovel. The house was silent, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a prison holding its breath. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:14 a.m. I knew Blake checked the hallway camera every hour on the hour because he was paranoid about me wandering, but he didn't know about the blind spot in the guest bedroom window. I moved with the precision that had defined my 40-year career as a structural engineer. I didn't open the window because the sash was wired to the alarm system Blake had installed yesterday. Instead, I went for the frame itself. I pulled a small flathead screwdriver from the hem of my pajama pants where I had sewn it earlier. I worked the screws out of the molding one by one, catching them in my hands so they wouldn't hit the floor. Beatrice always said my hands were steady enough to defuse a bomb, and tonight they had to be. I removed the entire interior casing, exposing the counterweights inside the wall. I gently lifted the sash out of its track, bypassing the magnetic sensor completely. It was a trick I learned retrofitting historic buildings in the 80s. I slipped through the opening and lowered myself onto the trellis of ivy Beatrice had planted. My joints screamed in protest, but I gritted my teeth and climbed down, landing softly in the mulch. I didn't look back. I moved through the shadows of the alley, avoiding the streetlights until I reached the main avenue where I hailed a night cab. I gave the driver an address in the financial district. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the lobby of a glass and steel tower staring at the directory. Aisha Thorne. She had been Beatrice's lawyer, fierce, brilliant, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who crossed her. I had called her emergency line from the park. She was waiting for me. I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, my reflection in the chrome doors showing a tired old man in a trench coat over pajamas. But my eyes were burning with a cold fire. Aisha met me at the glass doors of her firm. She didn't ask why I looked like a fugitive. She just led me to her corner office and poured me a glass of water. Her desk was covered in files she had pulled since my call. She looked at me with eyes that were sharp and assessing. "Reginald," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "You were right to come. I pulled the credit reports, but I found something much worse." She turned her monitor around so I could see. It was a digital copy of a loan application submitted 12 hours ago. It was a request for a hard money loan against my brownstone for $1 million. But it wasn't the amount that made my stomach turn, it was the signature line. It was signed by Blake as temporary guardian of Reginald Carter. I stared at the screen, feeling the blood drain from my face. "He hasn't even gotten the court order yet," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. "How did he do this?" Aisha tapped a document on the screen. "He filed an emergency ex parte motion this afternoon, claiming you are an immediate danger to yourself and others. He included a sworn affidavit from a Dr. Evans stating you are in the advanced stages of dementia and require secure facility placement. Based on that affidavit, the bank pre-approved the loan pending the final judge's signature tomorrow morning. He is leveraging your life, Reginald. He is cashing you out before you are even dead." The level of betrayal was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was stealing my identity, my autonomy, my very right to exist as a competent human being. He had reduced a lifetime of hard work and intelligence to a rubber stamp on a loan document. He was going to take the house my father paid for with sweat and blood and turn it into gambling chips. Aisha looked at me, her expression hardening. "We can stop the loan," she said. "I can file an injunction right now, but that tips our hand. If we stop the money, he will know you are lucid. He will know you are fighting back." I shook my head slowly. "No. Let him think he has won. I want him to walk into that bank tomorrow thinking he is the king of the world. I want to see the look on his face when the floor drops out." Just then, the burner phone I had bought from Mrs. Higgins buzzed in my pocket. The sound was loud in the quiet office. I pulled it out. It was Dr. Vance, my real doctor, the one I had snuck out to see yesterday for the blood work. I put it on speakerphone. "Reginald, are you safe?" Dr. Vance asked, his voice tight with urgency. "I am safe," I said. "I am with my lawyer." "Good, because you need to be. The toxicology report just came back from the lab. I had them run it twice because I didn't believe the numbers. You have extremely high levels of arsenic in your blood, Reginald. It is 5 times the lethal limit for chronic exposure. You should be in a coma right now. Your kidneys are functioning at 60%. This isn't accidental ingestion from bad water or food. Someone is dosing you heavily. If you go back to that house, you will be dead in 48 hours. The room went dead silent. Aisha looked at me, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped, revealing genuine horror. Arsenic, the poison of choice for cowards. It explained everything, the metallic taste in my mouth, the nausea, the shaking hands. He wasn't just gaslighting me, he was actively killing me while smiling in my face. "This is attempted murder," Dr. Vance continued. "I am required by law to report this to the police. I need to call them now." "No," I said sharply, "not yet. Give me 24 hours. "Reginald, this is crazy," Dr. Vance argued. "You are walking back into a death trap." "I am not walking into a trap," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I am the trap. If the police go there now, he claims it was an accident. He claims I took something by mistake. He has a crooked doctor to back him up. I need him to sign that paper tomorrow. I need him to commit the fraud. I need him to try to finish the job while the cameras are rolling." I looked at Aisha. She nodded slowly, understanding the game. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The man who walked out of that office wasn't a victim. He was an executioner waiting for the dawn. I leaned over Aisha's desk, staring at the document that was supposed to sign my life away. It was a durable power of attorney giving Blake full control over my assets, medical decisions, and housing. At the bottom was my signature. To a bank teller or a judge, it looked authentic. The loop of the C was right. The sharp finish on the T was there. But Blake had made one fatal mistake. He didn't know he was forging the signature of a structural engineer. I pulled a protractor from my pocket, a habit from 40 years on job sites that I never broke. I laid it over the paper. "Look at the capital R," I said, my voice low and steady. "When I sign my name, I always cross the vertical line of the R at exactly 45 degrees. It is muscle memory. It is geometry. I have done it that way since drafting school." I tapped the forgery. "This line is at 30 degrees. It is too steep. It lacks the precision of a man who respects the math." Blake traced this from an old birthday card or a check, but he didn't understand the mechanics of the hand that wrote it. He tried to steal my name, but he only stole the image of it. He missed the soul. Aisha looked closer, her eyes narrowing. "That is enough to contest it in court," she said. "We can hire a handwriting expert. We can tie this up in litigation for months." I shook my head. Litigation takes time. Time I do not have. The poison is in my veins now. I need to stop him tomorrow morning, not 6 months from now. If we fight this in court, he will just find another way to kill me before the hearing. I need to break his legs before he even starts running. Aisha sat back, tapping her pen against her chin. "You are right, Reginald. If we sue, he claims you signed it during a lucid interval. He claims the angle doesn't matter. He still gets the loan approved while we argue. We need to nuke the bridge before he tries to cross it." She pulled up a new file on her computer. "We are going to transfer the deed to the brownstone immediately. Not to another person, but to a revocable living trust. We will timestamp the transfer electronically tonight. By the time the bank opens at 9 a.m. to process Blake's loan, the property won't be in your name anymore. It will belong to the entity. His power of attorney allows him to act for Reginald Carter individual, but it gives him zero authority over the trust. The collateral for his $1 million loan will vanish into thin air." I watched her type, feeling a surge of adrenaline. It was a demolition job. Controlled, precise, irreversible. "What do we call the trust?" I asked. Aisha looked at me, her expression softening just for a moment. "The Beatrice Carter Memorial Trust," she said. "Let your wife protect you one last time." I felt a lump in my throat. Beatrice. She had hated Blake from the moment she met him. She used to say his eyes were too empty. Now even from the grave she was going to stop him. "Do it," I said. Aisha hit enter. The printer whirred to life. I signed the documents, my hands steady, my R crossing at exactly 45 degrees. We notarized it right there in the office with her paralegal who had come in late. The electronic filing confirmation popped up on the screen at 3:18 a.m. It was done. When Blake walked into that bank tomorrow, he wouldn't be holding a golden ticket. He would be holding a handful of ash. He would try to sell a house that no longer existed on his radar. I left Aisha's office with a copy of the trust document folded inside my jacket pocket right next to my heart. The city was quiet, the kind of deep silence that only happens right before the sun breaks. I took a cab to the corner of my block and walked the rest of the way through the alley. The ivy trellis was harder to climb going up. My muscles burned, and the arsenic made my head swim with every exertion. But fear is a powerful fuel. I reached the window ledge and pulled myself up, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I slid through the opening and into the guest bedroom. It smelled of the bleach they had used to clean the casino away. I worked fast, reversing my engineering. I slid the sash back into the counterweights. I replaced the interior casing. I screwed every screw back into its original hole, wiping the heads to remove any scratches. I even dusted the sill to hide my footprints. I was a ghost haunting my own house. I crept back to the master bedroom. The door was still locked, just as I had left it. I unlocked it from the inside and lay down on the bed fully clothed, except for my shoes, which I hid under the mattress. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows lengthen as dawn approached. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation. Down the hall, I heard a floorboard creak. Blake was waking up. He was probably checking his phone, smiling, thinking about the $1 million he was going to steal in a few hours. He didn't know the house he was sleeping in wasn't mine anymore. He didn't know the trap had already snapped shut. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing, preparing for the performance of a lifetime. The game was set. The pieces were moving. And I was ready to watch him fall. The smell of roast beef filled the dining room, but to me it smelled like a funeral parlor. Blake had insisted on cooking. He called it a celebration dinner, a welcome home feast for the father he loved so much. He had set the table with Beatrice's good china, the plates with the gold rims that we only used for Thanksgiving. It was a desecration. I sat at the head of the table, my hands resting on the white tablecloth, trying to control the tremors that were partly from the arsenic already in my system and partly from the sheer rage boiling in my gut. Nia sat to my right, looking pale and small. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She pushed her peas around her plate with a fork, the scraping sound loud in the tense silence. Then Blake walked in from the kitchen holding a decanter of red wine. He didn't pour it at the table. He had already poured 3 glasses. He carried 2 in one hand and 1 in the other. He placed the single glass in front of me with a flourish. It was filled to the brim, the liquid dark and heavy like Venus blood. "Drink up," Pop Blake said, sitting down opposite me and raising his own glass. It is a vintage Cabernet, very expensive. It is good for the heart, it gets the blood flowing. I looked at the glass. The light from the chandelier caught the surface, and for a second I imagined I could see the powder dissolving in the depths. Arsenic is tasteless, odorless, and colorless, but in that moment I could smell the metallic tang of death coming off it in waves. "I am not thirsty," I said, my voice raspy. "My stomach is upset, son." Blake's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Just a sip, Reginald. It will help you relax. You have been so tense since you got back. Dr. Evans said red wine is a natural vasodilator. We want you healthy for your trip to the facility, don't we?" He wasn't asking. It was a command wrapped in a lie. He leaned forward, staring at me with the intensity of a predator waiting for the trap to spring. "Drink," he said softly. "For the family." I knew I had to do it. If I refused, he would force it down my throat or find another way. I had to make him believe he had won. I reached out my hand, shaking intentionally more than necessary, and wrapped my fingers around the stem. "To family," I whispered. I lifted the glass to my lips. I tilted my head back. I let the liquid flow into my mouth, but I clamped my throat shut. I held the poison in my cheeks, feeling the burn of the alcohol. I lowered the glass and immediately grabbed the thick linen napkin I had prepared. I had sewn a layer of absorbent terry cloth inside it earlier that afternoon. I pressed the napkin to my mouth and coughed violently, a hacking, convulsive sound that shook my whole body. Into the folds of the cloth I spat the wine, every drop. I wiped my mouth aggressively, masking the action as cleaning up spittle. I shoved the damp, stained napkin into my jacket pocket and grabbed the clean one from the table to replace it. Blake didn't notice. He was too busy watching my face, waiting for the signs. I gave them to him. I let my fork clatter onto the china. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I started to hyperventilate, gasping for air like a fish on a deck. "Pop," Nia said, her voice trembling. "Daddy, are you okay?" I didn't answer. I let my eyes roll back into my head, showing the whites. I let my body go rigid, then started to spasm uncontrollably. My arm flailed out, knocking the wine glass over. The red liquid spread across the white tablecloth, staining it like a fresh wound. It dripped onto the floor with a steady tap, tap, tap. I slid out of the chair, crashing onto the hardwood floor. I writhed for a moment, kicking my legs, and then I went still. I lay on my back, my mouth slightly open, my eyes staring unseeingly at the ceiling. I held my breath, shallowing it out until my chest barely moved. I waited for the frantic call to 911. I waited for the panic. I waited for my daughter to scream for help. The room went silent. The only sound was the dripping wine. Then I heard the scrape of a chair. Footsteps approached me. They were heavy, confident footsteps. Blake stood directly over me. I could see the toes of his Italian leather shoes inches from my face. He didn't kneel. He didn't check for a pulse. He didn't check to see if I was choking. He chuckled. It was a low, dry sound devoid of any humanity. Finally, he said, "That batch was strong." He nudged my leg with his foot like he was checking a dead raccoon on the side of the road. "I think he is gone, or close enough. The brain damage from a seizure this bad will be permanent. He will be a vegetable by morning." I lay there frozen, screaming inside my own mind. He wasn't scared. He was relieved. He had just watched a man collapse, and his only reaction was to calculate the timeline. Nia Blake said, his voice sharp and authoritative, "Stop crying. We knew this was coming. He was old. He was sick. We just helped nature along." "I cannot look at him, Blake," Nia sobbed, but she didn't move to help me. She didn't come to my side. She stayed in her chair, paralyzed by her own weakness. "You do not have to look," Blake said. "Just go get the folder from the study, the one with the admission forms. We need to have everything ready for the paramedics when we call them in the morning. We will say we found him like this. Rigor will set in by then, but Dr. Evans will sign off on the time of death. We are clear. Wait until morning." They were going to leave me on the floor all night. They were going to let me die slowly while they slept upstairs. "Go," Blake ordered. "Pack his bag. We are shipping him out at dawn. Alive or dead, he leaves this house tomorrow." I heard Nia's chair scrape. I heard her footsteps retreating, running up the stairs, away from the guilt, away from her father. She didn't look back. She left me there. Blake lingered for a moment longer. He leaned down and whispered to my unmoving face, "You should have stayed on the plane, Reggie. You could have died in the sun. Now you die on the floor." He stood up, turned off the lights, and walked out of the room whistling. I lay in the dark, listening to him climb the stairs, listening to the house settle around me. My heart was breaking not from the poison, but from the truth. My family wasn't just flawed, they were evil. And as I lay there on the cold wood, soaking in the silence, I made a promise to the darkness. They wanted a body. Tomorrow morning I would give them one, but it wouldn't be the one they expected. The morning sun hit my face like a spotlight, but I kept my eyes half closed, letting my head loll to the side against the cold leather of the car seat. Blake was driving fast, weaving through traffic with the desperation of a man running out of time. He had dragged me out of bed at 6 a.m., dressing me like a rag doll in a suit that hung loosely on my frame because of the weight I had lost from the poison. I didn't resist. I let my limbs hang heavy. I let a line of drool escape the corner of my mouth. I was giving him exactly what he wanted to see, a broken, empty shell of a man. We pulled up to a nondescript office building downtown, the kind with tinted windows and no name on the door. This wasn't my lawyer's office. It was a place where money changed hands in the dark. Blake hauled me out of the car, gripping my arm so hard I knew it would leave bruises. He practically carried me into the lobby, his breath coming in short, agitated puffs. We went into a small conference room that smelled of stale coffee and toner ink. A woman sat behind a large mahogany table. Her nameplate read, Ms. Perkins, Notary Public. She looked up and her eyes widened when she saw me. I made sure to stumble, dragging my left foot as if the stroke Blake had invented was real. I sank into the chair opposite her, letting my head drop forward onto my chest. Blake sat down next to me, radiating a nervous energy that made the air hum. He slid a stack of documents across the table. "We are in a bit of a hurry, Ms. Perkins," he said, flashing a charming smile that didn't reach his predatory eyes. "My father-in-law is not feeling well today, but we need to get these loan documents finalized for his medical care. It is an emergency." Ms. Perkins looked at me, then back at Blake. She hesitated, holding her pen in midair. "Mr. Carter," she asked softly, "do you understand what you are signing today? This is a deed of trust transferring substantial equity." I let out a low moan and muttered something unintelligible about Beatrice and the garden. I saw Ms. Perkins wince. She looked at Blake with clear discomfort. "Sir, he doesn't seem lucid. I am not comfortable notarizing this without a medical certificate." Blake slammed his hand on the table just hard enough to startle her. "I have the power of attorney right here," he hissed, sliding another paper forward. "And here is the affidavit from Dr. Evans stating he is competent but physically frail. Do your job." "We are paying for a rush service, not a moral lecture." Ms. Perkins shrank back, intimidated. She picked up the stamp. She was going to do it. She was going to sign my life away because she was afraid of the white man in the expensive suit. Blake grabbed the pen and positioned it over the signature line. He looked at me with a mixture of disgust and triumph. "This is it, Reggie," he whispered so only I could hear. "Goodbye, Brownstone. Hello, nursing home." He pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. The ink started to bleed into the fiber. He was 1 second away from stealing $1 million, 1 second away from erasing my legacy. I held my breath, waiting for the thunder, and then it struck. Blake's phone rang. It wasn't a normal ringtone. It was the shrill priority alert he had set for his bank contacts. The sound sliced through the tension in the room like a knife. Blake froze. He looked at the phone, then at the paper. He could have signed. He should have signed. But greed makes men anxious. He snatched the phone up, thinking it was the confirmation of the funds transfer. He answered on speaker, his arrogance demanding an audience. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I am just signing the final papers now. When can I expect the wire?" The voice on the other end was dry, cold, and professional. It filled the small room, bouncing off the walls. "Mr. Black, there will be no wire. We have halted the transaction." Blake's face went white. He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "What do you mean, halted? I have the power of attorney. The house is appraised at $2 million. The collateral is solid. The collateral does not exist," Mr. Black, the banker, replied. "We ran a final title check 3 minutes ago as per protocol. The property located at 412 Sterling Place is no longer owned by Reginald Carter." Time seemed to stop. I watched the blood drain from Blake's face, leaving him gray and sweating. He looked like a man who had stepped off a ledge expecting a staircase and found only air. "What are you talking about?" he screamed into the phone, forgetting Ms. Perkins entirely. "He has owned that house for 40 years. I have the deed right here in my hand." "You have an invalid deed, sir," the banker said, his voice dropping an octave. The records show that at 3:18 a.m. this morning, the title was transferred in its entirety to the Beatrice Carter Memorial Trust. Your power of attorney gives you control over Mr. Carter's personal assets, but it gives you zero authority over the trust. You are trying to leverage a property your father-in-law does not own. The loan is denied. Do not contact us again. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Ms. Perkins slowly pulled the documents back across the table out of Blake's reach. She looked at him not with fear this time, but with suspicion. Blake stood there, the phone still in his hand, the dial tone buzzing like a fly. He couldn't process it. He couldn't understand how a senile old man locked in a bedroom could move $1 million asset in the middle of the night. His brain was trying to solve an equation that had no solution because he was missing the variable of my intelligence. Then the rage took over. It started as a tremor in his hand and exploded upward. He screamed a raw animal sound of frustration and hurled his phone against the wall. It shattered, sending plastic and glass skittering across the floor. He turned on me. His eyes were wide, wild, and red-rimmed. He looked like a cornered rat that had just realized the trap was inescapable. "You," he whispered the word, choking him. "You did this. How did you do this? You are brain dead. You are a vegetable." I decided it was time. I stopped slouching. I engaged my core muscles and sat up straight, my spine aligning against the back of the chair. I lifted my head, which had been hanging heavy on my chest. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the office, and exhaled the persona of the victim. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, wiping the drool from my chin with a slow, deliberate motion. Then I looked at him. I didn't blink. My eyes weren't cloudy or confused. They were clear, sharp, and cold as the steel of the bridges I used to build. I let the silence stretch, letting him see the man he had really been dealing with. I let him see the engineer who calculated loads and stresses for a living. I let him see the father whose heart he had broken. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table, my gaze locking onto his terrified eyes. "I am not the vegetable, Blake," I said, my voice steady and deep, devoid of any tremor. "You are the weed, and I just pulled you up by the roots." The ride back to the brownstone was a blur of aggressive driving and suffocating silence. Blake drove like a man possessed, running red lights and swerving through traffic, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat in the passenger seat saying nothing. I didn't need to speak. The silence was heavier than any shout. When we screeched into the driveway, Blake didn't open my door. He stormed around the car, yanked it open, and dragged me out by the collar of my suit jacket. He hauled me up the front steps, not caring if I stumbled, not caring who saw. He shoved me through the front door and kicked it shut behind us, throwing the deadbolt with a metallic clack that sounded like a prison cell closing. He spun me around and shoved me hard. I flew backward, my feet tangling in the rug, and I hit the hardwood floor with a bone-jarring thud. Pain shot up my hip, the same hip Dr. Evans said was failing due to age, but was actually failing due to poison. Blake stood over me, his chest heaving, his face a mask of twisted red rage. "What is your game, old man?" he screamed, spitting the words at me. "What did you do at that office? How did you move the deed? You are supposed to be brain dead. You are supposed to be drooling in a cup. Answer me." I looked up at him. I didn't cringe. I didn't cower. I placed my hands flat on the floor and pushed myself up. It took effort. The arsenic still coursed through my veins, making my muscles twitch, but my will was stronger than the chemistry in my blood. I stood up slowly, unfolding my full height until I was looking him in the eye. I brushed the dust from my jacket sleeves with deliberate, slow movements. I straightened my tie. I took a breath and let the facade of the helpless invalid fall away completely. "I did what I should have done the first day you walked through that door, Blake," I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated in the quiet house. "I protected my family from a parasite. You thought I was weak because I am old. You thought I was stupid because I was quiet. But you forgot one thing. I built this house. I know where every beam lies, and I know how to bring it down on top of you." The shock on his face lasted only a second before it was replaced by a feral violence. He roared a sound of pure animal fury and lunged at me. His fist connected with my jaw, snapping my head back. I tasted blood. I stumbled back, crashing into the hallway table, knocking over a vase that shattered into 1,000 pieces. Blake was on me before I could recover. He grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the wall, his thumbs digging into my windpipe. "Stop it, Blake, stop it!" Nia came running from the kitchen, screaming. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him off me. Blake didn't even look at her. He just swung his arm back in a violent arc. The back of his hand connected with Nia's face with a sickening crack. She flew backward and hit the floor, sliding across the wood until she hit the baseboard. She lay there stunned, clutching her cheek, blood already seeping between her fingers. "You useless cow," Blake shouted, turning his rage on her. "This is your fault. You couldn't even keep him sedated properly. Do you know what happens now? Do you know what happens when I do not have that money by noon?" He was pacing now, tearing at his hair, his eyes wild. "They are going to kill me, Nia. Marcus and his crew. They are going to cut me into pieces. That $1 million was my life insurance. It was the only thing keeping them from putting a bullet in my head. And your father just signed my death warrant." He looked back at me, and the fear in his eyes morphed into something darker, something final. He realized he had nothing left to lose. A desperate man is dangerous, but a desperate man who thinks he is already dead is a monster. He walked into the kitchen. I watched him go, trying to catch my breath, trying to clear the ringing in my ears. I moved toward Nia, helping her sit up. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror, and for the first time in years, recognition. She saw me. She saw her father, not the burden she wanted to discard. "Daddy," she whispered. "I am sorry." Blake came back. In his right hand, he held the 8-inch chef's knife Beatrice used to carve the Sunday roast. The steel glinted in the hallway light. "Get up!" he ordered, pointing the knife at us. "What are you doing, Blake?" I asked, stepping in front of Nia, shielding her with my body. "I am improvising," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I cannot get the loan. The trust blocked it. But trusts have beneficiaries. If you die, Reggie, the trust pays out to Nia. And if Nia dies well as her husband, I inherit everything." He took a step closer, the knife steady in his hand. "It is going to be a robbery gone wrong," he muttered, as if writing the script in his head. "A home invasion. Tragic." The intruders broke in looking for the safe. They panicked. They killed the old man. They killed the daughter. I survived. I will be the grieving hero. The police will believe it. This neighborhood is gentrifying, but it still has crime. It happens every day. You will never get away with it, I said, keeping my eyes on the blade, calculating the distance between us. "I have to get away with it," Blake hissed, lunging forward. "Because if I do not, I am dead anyway. I would rather take my chances with a jury than with Marcus. Now move, both of you, downstairs." He waved the knife toward the basement door. The dark maw of the cellar waited below. He wanted us underground where the screams wouldn't be heard, where the blood would be easy to clean. I felt Nia trembling behind me, clutching the back of my jacket. I looked at the basement door and then back at Blake. He thought he was herding sheep to the slaughter. He didn't know he was sending the engineer into the engine room. "Move," he screamed, slashing the air inches from my face. I stepped back, guiding Nia toward the door. I squeezed her hand once hard. A signal. We were going down, but we weren't going down to die. We were going down to war. The basement door gaped open like a black mouth waiting to swallow us whole. Blake jabbed the knife toward my kidneys, his breath hot and ragged on the back of my neck. He was losing control, unraveling into a creature of pure instinct and violence. He thought he was marching us to our execution, but he had forgotten who built this house. He had forgotten that I spent 40 years calculating structural integrity and failure points. I knew exactly where the weak spots were, and right now the weak spot was his arrogance. I stumbled on the threshold, feigning a weakness I no longer felt. My hand slipped into my jacket pocket, my fingers closing around the cold aluminum canister Mrs. Higgins had pressed into my palm 3 nights ago. It was military-grade pepper spray, the kind postal workers use for aggressive dogs. Blake stepped closer, raising the knife for a final shove. That was his mistake. He got too close. I spun around my movement fluid and fast-powered by a surge of adrenaline that burned through the arsenic in my veins. I didn't hesitate. I didn't warn him. I aimed for the eyes and pressed the trigger. The stream of orange liquid hit him point-blank in the face. Blake screamed a sound that wasn't human. It was the shriek of a blinded animal. He dropped the knife, clutching his face with both hands, clawing at his own skin as the chemical burn set in. He staggered back, crashing into the hallway wall, blindly swinging his fists at the empty air. "Run!" I shouted to Nia, grabbing her wrist. Her eyes were wide with shock, her body frozen. I didn't have time to be gentle. I yanked her forward, dragging her through the doorway and down the wooden stairs. She stumbled, her heels clattering on the steps, but I kept my grip iron tight. We hit the concrete floor of the basement, and I immediately spun around to the door. This wasn't a standard interior door. 2 years ago, I had reinforced it with a steel core and heavy-duty deadbolts. I told Blake it was for fire safety, but really, it was because I never trusted the world outside. I slammed the heavy door shut and threw the 3 locking mechanisms into place. The solid thud of the steel bolts sliding home was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. We were locked in. But more importantly, he was locked out. Upstairs, the house shook. Blake had recovered enough to find the door. He threw his entire body weight against it, screaming obscenities that vibrated through the wood. He kicked and pounded his fists, drumming a frantic rhythm of rage and pain. "Open this door," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Open it or I will burn this house down with you inside." I stood back, catching my breath, watching the door hold firm. I had installed the frame into the load-bearing studs. He could batter it all day. He wasn't getting in without a battering ram. Then the pounding stopped. For a moment there was silence, heavy and suffocating. Then I heard him pacing above us, his footsteps heavy and uneven. I heard him shouting, but not at us. He was on the phone. I moved to the ventilation duct that ran along the basement ceiling, knowing it carried sound from the kitchen directly down here. I gestured for Nia to be quiet. "Marcus," he was yelling, his voice trembling with a mix of agony from the pepper spray and sheer terror. "Get here. Now. Yes, I have them. They are trapped in the basement. No, I do not have the money. The bank fell through, but the old man has a safe down there. He has cash. I know he does. Just come. Bring the boys. Tear the place apart. I do not care. Just get me out of this." He hung up and kicked the door again. "Did you hear that, Reggie?" he shouted through the wood. "My friends are coming. They are not like me. They do not have patience. They are going to cut through this door, and when they do, I am going to let them have their way with you." He laughed, a broken, manic sound. "You think you are safe down there? You just dug your own grave. You are trapped like rats." I stepped away from the vent. He had called the wolves. Marcus was a name whispered in the neighborhood, a man who ran illegal gambling rings and broke legs for sport. Blake had just turned my home into a war zone. He had invited the devil to dinner because he didn't want to eat alone. Nia was huddled in the corner, sitting on a stack of old magazines. She was shaking violently, her hands covering her face. She looked small and broken, a shadow of the woman who had served drinks to gangsters just a few nights ago. "Daddy," she sobbed, rocking back and forth. "I am so sorry. I didn't know he would do this. I thought he just wanted the money. I didn't know he was a monster. Please forgive me. I was so scared. I just wanted us to be happy." I looked at her. My daughter. My flesh and blood. I remembered holding her when she was born, promising to protect her from the world. But looking at her now, I didn't feel that warm, protective instinct. I felt a cold detachment. She had watched me eat poisoned food. She had planned to put me in a home to rot. She was only sorry because the plan had failed. She was only crying because she was in danger. I walked past her without a word. I didn't touch her shoulder. I didn't offer a tissue. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't okay. Some things cannot be fixed with a hug. Some betrayals break the mold so completely that the pieces can never fit back together. I went to the large oak wine cabinet against the far wall. It was filled with dusty bottles of vintage red wine that Beatrice had collected. Blake had never come down here because he had no taste for wine and no patience for dust. He didn't know that the cabinet was built on a false back. I reached behind the third row of Merlot and found the hidden latch. I pressed it, and the entire center section of the rack clicked and swung forward on silent hinges. Behind the wine was a control panel glowing with soft blue LED lights. It wasn't a safe. It was a command center. I had installed it 5 years ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. It was a hardwired silent alarm system, independent of the phone lines, independent of the Wi-Fi, powered by its own battery backup. Nia looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "What is that?" she whispered. "This is the end of the line, Nia," I said, my voice flat. I punched in a 6-digit code. The code was Beatrice's birthday. The screen flashed green. Signal sent. "This doesn't go to a security company call center in another state," I said, staring at the screen. "This goes directly to the personal cell phone of Sheriff Miller. We played poker together for 20 years. I fixed his roof after the hurricane. He knows that if this alarm trips, it isn't a glitch. It means I am dying." I turned back to Nia. "Blake called his friends. I called mine. Now we wait to see who gets here first. I sat down in my old workbench chair, picked up a heavy wrench and rested it on my knee, my eyes fixed on the steel door, waiting for the war to begin. The cavalry didn't arrive first, the vultures did. From my position in the basement, sitting on the workbench chair, I heard the screech of tires on the pavement outside, followed by the heavy slam of car doors. There were no sirens, just the aggressive silence of men who came to collect a debt. I checked my watch. It had been 7 minutes since Blake made the call. Marcus was punctual, I had to give him that. Upstairs, the front door didn't open. It exploded. The sound of splintering wood and shattering glass echoed down the ventilation shaft loud enough to make Nia scream and cover her head. I heard heavy boots stomping on the hardwood floors, boots that didn't care about scratching the finish. Then came Blake's voice, shrill and terrified. "Marcus, wait, please let me explain." The bank had a glitch. The sound of a fist hitting flesh is distinctive. It is a wet, heavy thud that you feel in your own teeth. Blake stopped talking mid-sentence, and I heard a body hit the floor hard. A deep voice rumbled through the floorboards, vibrating the dust in the basement air. "I do not care about glitches, Blake. You said you had my money. You said $1 million by noon. It is 12:15. Please." Blake sobbed, and I could hear him scrambling backward, probably knocking over the hallway table. "I have assets, the house, the car. Just give me a week." Another thud, then the sound of furniture breaking. They were tearing the place apart. I heard the crash of the china cabinet in the dining room, the one filled with Beatrice's collection. Each crash was a piece of my history being destroyed by the consequences of Blake's greed. But I didn't flinch. I sat still, my hands folded over the wrench, my breathing steady. I wasn't protecting the house anymore. I was protecting the truth. Upstairs, the beating continued. Blake was screaming now, begging for mercy, begging for time, but Marcus wasn't a bank. He didn't offer extensions. He offered pain. Then the screaming changed. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was desperation. Blake realized he was going to die right there on my rug. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a distraction. I heard him yell, his voice cracking with blood and mucus. "The old man, he is downstairs, he is in the basement, he has a safe, a secret safe. He has millions in cash, Marcus, millions." I shook my head. He was selling me out even as he bled. He was willing to let these wolves tear me apart if it bought him 5 more minutes of life. I heard the heavy boots move toward the basement door. The handle jiggled, then rattled violently. Locked, one of the thugs grunted. "Get the drill," Marcus ordered. The sound of an industrial hammer drill is deafening in an enclosed space. The bit bit into the steel core of the door with a high-pitched shriek that made my teeth ache. Sparks flew from the hinges, illuminating the dark stairwell. Nia was curled in a ball on the floor, sobbing hysterically, her hands over her ears. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, begging me to do something, begging me to save us. But I didn't move. I watched the door vibrate. I watched the paint blister from the heat of the friction. They were cutting through the deadbolts. It would take them about 3 minutes. I stood up slowly and walked to the back of the room. I wasn't going for a weapon. I was going for the remote control. I pointed it at the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall above the workbench, the one I used for reviewing blueprints. I pressed the power button. The screen hummed to life, bathing the dusty basement in a cool blue glow. I adjusted the webcam that was mounted on top of it, positioning it so it captured the doorme and the cowering figure of Nia. The drill whined one last time and then crunched through. The door groaned. A heavy boot kicked it, and it swung open, banging against the concrete wall. 3 men stood on the stairs, silhouetted by the light from the hallway. They were huge, holding crowbars and guns. Blake was behind them, his face a ruin of blood and bruises, pointing a shaking finger at me. "There he is," he screamed. "Get the money. Kill him if you have to, just get the money." Marcus stepped down onto the basement floor, his gun raised. "Where is the safe, old man?" he growled. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't beg. I just pointed a finger at the large screen behind me. "Say hello to the world, gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. Marcus looked up. Blake looked up. The thugs looked up. On the screen was a live video feed. But it wasn't just a mirror image. It was the interface of Facebook Live and YouTube simultaneously. The red live icon was pulsing in the corner, and next to it was the viewer count. 15,000 people. The numbers were climbing by the second. The chat box on the side was scrolling so fast, it was a blur of text. "Call the police. Those are guns. Oh my God, is that Blake? I am recording this. The cops are on the way." I had started the stream the moment I heard the car doors slam upstairs using the hidden cameras I had installed in the living room. The world had watched Marcus break down my door. They had watched him beat Blake. They had heard Blake order my execution. And now they were looking directly into the faces of the men holding guns in my basement. "You are live on the internet," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. 15,000 witnesses. Every face here has been screen captured. Every threat has been recorded. The cloud servers backed up the footage 10 seconds ago. You can shoot me, but you cannot shoot the internet. Marcus lowered his gun slowly, his face draining of color. He was a criminal, but he wasn't stupid. He knew what this meant. It meant his face was currently on thousands of phones across the city. It meant anonymity was gone. It meant the game was over. Blake stared at the screen, his mouth open, blood dripping from his chin onto his shirt. He looked at the viewer count, and then he looked at me. For the first time, he didn't see a weak old man. He saw the engineer who had designed the trap that just snapped his neck. "We are leaving," Marcus said, backing up the stairs, his eyes never leaving the camera. "We were never here." "You can run," I said, sitting back down in my chair. "But you are already famous." And then from the distance, growing louder every second, came the sound I had been waiting for. Sirens. Dozens of them. The cavalry had finally arrived, but the war was already won. The wail of sirens outside was not a warning. It was a tsunami of sound that vibrated the concrete floor beneath my feet. Marcus and his thugs froze, their eyes darting from the screen to the stairs. They knew the difference between a patrol car responding to a noise complaint and a tactical deployment. This was the latter. I heard the bullhorn echo from the street demanding surrender, but the words were drowned out by the sound of the front and back doors being breached simultaneously. It sounded like the house was being torn apart by giant metal claws. Glass shattered upstairs, heavy boots thundered across the floorboards, and the distinct pop and hiss of tear gas canisters firing filled the air. Marcus didn't hesitate. He dropped his gun on the basement floor and raised his hands, kneeling down instantly. He was a career criminal, and he knew when a situation had gone from bad to fatal. His thugs followed suit, dropping crowbars and pistols, terrified of the red laser dots that I imagined were already sweeping the windows upstairs. But Blake didn't kneel. Blake was not a professional criminal. He was a desperate amateur, fueled by adrenaline and the terrifying certainty that his life was over. He looked at the stairs where white smoke was beginning to drift down, carrying the stinging scent of chemical agents. He looked at me sitting calmly in my chair, and then his gaze fell on Nia. The first SWAT officer appeared at the top of the stairs, clad in black armor, a rifle raised. "Police, get down on the ground!" he screamed, his voice distorted by a gas mask. Marcus and his crew lay flat. But Blake moved with a speed born of pure panic. He didn't run toward the police. He ran toward Nia. He grabbed her by her hair, yanking her up from the floor with a violence that made her scream. He spun her around, pulling her body against his, using her as a shield between him and the rifles at the top of the stairs. He raised the chef's knife, the same one he had threatened me with earlier, and pressed the blade against the soft skin of her throat. "Back off," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek of hysteria. "I will kill her. I swear to God I will open her up. Get back or she dies." The officers froze. The red laser sights danced on Blake's forehead, but they couldn't take the shot. He was moving too much, shaking Nia like a rag doll, keeping her head right in front of his own. I stood up slowly, my hands raised, showing the police I was unarmed, but my eyes never left Blake. "Blake, let her go," I said, my voice steady despite the terror gripping my heart. "It is over. There is nowhere to go." He turned the knife slightly, and a thin line of red appeared on Nia's neck. "Shut up, old man," he spat, saliva flying from his mouth. "This is your fault. You did this. You ruined everything. I just needed the money. Why couldn't you just die? Why did you have to be so stubborn?" Nia was sobbing, but she wasn't looking at the knife. She wasn't looking at the police. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with tears and a profound realization. In that moment, the spell broke. The manipulation, the lies, the gaslighting, it all dissolved. She saw the man holding a knife to her throat, not as her husband, but as the monster he had always been. And she saw me not as a burden, but as the father who had tried to warn her. "Daddy," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "I am sorry. Please forgive me." It was the apology I had waited years to hear, but it came at the edge of a blade. I looked at her, and I tried to send every ounce of love and forgiveness I had left in my soul through my eyes. I wanted her to know that despite the poison, despite the betrayal, she was still my daughter. Blake started to drag her backward toward the dark corner of the basement, away from the stairs, seeking cover. He was ranting now, babbling about helicopters and getaway cars, completely detached from reality. He didn't realize that the basement window, the small rectangular one high up on the wall behind the workbench, had been broken by the vibration of the drill earlier. He didn't know that there was a clear line of sight from the backyard. I saw the shadow move across the window before Blake did. I saw the glint of a barrel in the moonlight filtering through the broken glass. A sniper from the tactical team had positioned himself in the garden. "Nia, close your eyes," I commanded, my voice cutting through Blake's screaming. She obeyed instantly, trusting me for the first time in a decade. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. It wasn't a bang, it was a crack like lightning striking the foundation. Blake's right shoulder exploded. The impact spun him around, throwing him away from Nia and slamming him against the washing machine. The knife clattered to the floor, sliding across the concrete. Blake slumped to the ground, clutching his shattered shoulder, screaming in agony. The blood was bright red against his white shirt. He wasn't dead, but he was done. Nia collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her hand flying to the small cut on her neck. Officers swarmed down the stairs, a tide of black uniforms and shouting voices. They were on Blake in seconds, zip-tying his hands behind his back, ignoring his screams of pain. They cuffed Marcus and his thugs, dragging them up the stairs. A medic rushed to Nia, checking her neck, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She was shaking violently in shock. She looked up at me, reaching out a trembling hand. I walked over to her. I didn't hug her. Not yet. I squeezed her hand once hard, just like I had done upstairs before we went into battle. It was a promise that we survived. I turned away from her and looked at Blake. He was writhing on the floor, his face gray with shock. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with hate and fear. I walked toward him. The officers tried to guide me away, but I shrugged them off. I walked right up to him. I stepped over his legs, looking down at him like he was a stain on my floor that needed to be scrubbed out. "I told you, Blake," I said softly so only he could hear. "I built this house, and I just buried you in it." I walked up the stairs, out of the basement and into the flashing lights of the living room, leaving the darkness behind me forever. I sat behind the one-way glass of the interrogation room, watching a man who had no spine. Blake sat at the metal table, his right shoulder heavily bandaged and his arm in a sling from the sniper round that had taken him down. He looked pale and sweaty, the pain meds clearly wearing off, but his mouth was still moving fast. I listened to the audio feed through the speakers in the observation room, standing next to Sheriff Miller. I expected Blake to lawyer up or stay silent, but I should have known better. Cowards do not stay silent when they think they can talk their way out of a cage. Blake was singing, but he wasn't confessing. He was blaming. It was all Nia. He said, his voice trembling with a fake sob. "She is the one who hated him. She has hated him for years. She said he was controlling. She said he was ruining our marriage. I just wanted to move away, but she insisted we needed the money. She bought the poison. She put it in his food. I tried to stop her, but she threatened to leave me." I watched him wipe his nose with his good hand, his eyes wide and pleading as he looked at the detective. He was painting a picture of a manipulated husband, a victim of a cruel wife, and an overbearing father-in-law. He claimed he didn't know about the loan fraud, that Nia had forged the documents. He claimed the casino night was Nia's idea to raise money to pay off debts he didn't know she had. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He was willing to send the mother of his child to prison for life just to shave a few years off his own sentence. He looked at the detective and said, "I love that old man. I respected him. I was just trying to protect him from his own daughter." The audacity made my stomach turn. He was using the very racism he harbored to his advantage, playing the role of the innocent white man caught in a dysfunctional black family's drama. He thought that if he cried hard enough, if he played the victim well enough, the police might overlook the knife he held to my daughter's throat. He was betting on his privilege one last time. Sheriff Miller looked at me, his jaw set tight. He turned off the audio feed. "Do you want to hear more, Reggie?" he asked. I shook my head. I had heard enough. I didn't need to hear any more lies. I needed to show them the truth. I walked into the interrogation room. Blake looked up, and for a second he looked relieved, thinking maybe I was there to save him. That hope died instantly when he saw the plastic evidence bag in my hand. I didn't sit down. I walked right up to the table and placed two items on the cold metal surface between us. The first was a small black SD card taken from the camera I had hidden in the smoke detector. The second was a stiff, purple-stained linen napkin sealed in plastic. "This is not hearsay, Blake," I said, my voice filling the small room. "This is science. And this is your voice." I looked at the detective. "Play the audio file labeled Kitchen Tuesday Night." The detective plugged the card into his laptop. A moment later, Blake's voice filled the room, clear and distorted by hate. I heard him say the words that had burned into my soul. "This old black man is tough like leather. I am increasing the dose starting tonight. He won't survive the week." Then the sound of him laughing. Then the sound of him discussing the nursing home in the Glades. Blake's face went gray. He slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. But I wasn't done. I pointed to the napkin. "And this," I said, "is the vintage Cabernet you tried to force feed me last night. I didn't drink it, Blake. I spit it into this napkin. The lab boys are running the tests right now, but we both know what they are going to find. High concentrations of arsenic mixed with alcohol. That is premeditated attempted murder. That is a biological weapon. And because you crossed state lines to buy the poison that makes it a federal crime." I leaned in close, my hands flat on the table. "You tried to frame my daughter. You tried to frame me as senile. But the only thing you succeeded in doing was recording your own confession. You called me a slur in my own house. You tried to sell my legacy. Now you are going to pay for it with the rest of your life." Blake didn't speak. He just stared at the napkin, the red stain looking like dried blood. He knew it was over. The narrative he had spun, the victimhood he had claimed, it all evaporated under the weight of hard evidence. He wasn't a victim. He was a predator who had walked into a trap. I left Blake in the room with his silence and walked back into the hallway. The station was buzzing with activity officers processing the thugs from the basement and cataloging the evidence from the casino. Sheriff Miller guided me toward another observation room down the hall. Through the glass, I saw Nia. She wasn't in an interrogation room. She was in a holding cell, sitting on a metal bench with her head in her hands. She looked small, broken, and utterly alone. Her neck was bandaged where the knife had cut her. She was rocking back and forth, crying softly. Reggie, the sheriff, said gently, "She has been asking for you. She told us everything. She corroborated your story about the poison. She admitted she knew. She admitted she helped. But she says she was scared. She says he threatened her. Do you want to go in? You can talk to her if you want." I looked at my daughter. I remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle holding the back of the seat until she found her balance. I remembered her graduation day, how proud I was when she walked across the stage. I loved her. God help me, I loved her more than I loved myself. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go in there, to hold her, to tell her it was going to be okay, to hire the best lawyer I could find and get her out of this mess. But then I remembered the kitchen table. I remembered her voice saying, "I do not want to watch him suffer, I just want him out of the way." I remembered her serving drinks to the men who were destroying my home. She hadn't been a hostage. She had been a participant. She had watched her husband poison her father day after day, and she had said nothing. She had chosen her comfort over my life. If I saved her now, I wouldn't be helping her. I would be enabling the weakness that had nearly killed us both. I took a deep breath, the air in the station tasting of stale coffee and floor wax. I turned my back on the glass. "No, Sheriff," I said, my voice cracking slightly before finding its strength. "I do not want to see her." "But she is your daughter," Reggie, the sheriff, said, surprised. "I know," I said, "and that is why this is the hardest thing I have ever done. But she is also an adult who made a choice. She watched a man try to kill me, and she helped him set the table. Process her according to the law. Charge her as an accessory. Charge her with conspiracy. Let a jury decide if she was scared or if she was greedy." I looked back one last time at the woman weeping on the bench. "I do not have a daughter who helps kill her father," I whispered. "That woman in there is a stranger to me." I walked out of the station into the cool night air. I was alone. My house was a crime scene. My family was in cells. My heart was broken. But I was alive, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. 6 months of legal maneuvering had transformed the monster who tried to kill me into a victim. I sat in the front row of the gallery watching the performance of a lifetime. Blake sat at the defense table wearing a sweater vest and wire-rimmed glasses, looking more like a misunderstood graduate student than a man who had poisoned his father-in-law. His lawyer, a high-priced shark paid for by liquidating the last of Blake's hidden assets, was pacing in front of the jury box, weaving a tale of tragedy. He didn't deny the poisoning. He didn't deny the fraud. He denied the intent. He argued that Blake was suffering from a dissociative psychotic break induced by the extreme stress of the gambling debts. He painted a picture of a man hunted by the mob, his mind fracturing under the threat of violence until he could no longer distinguish right from wrong. "He is not a murderer," the lawyer bellowed, pointing a finger at Blake, who hung his head in practiced shame. "He is a desperate man who snapped. He was not trying to kill Reginald Carter out of malice. He was trying to solve an impossible equation in a broken mind. He believed he was saving his family from the loan sharks. He needs a hospital, not a prison cell." I listened to this narrative and felt a cold fire in my gut. It was insulting. It was a mockery of the precision Blake had used. A psychotic man doesn't research chemical half-lives. A broken mind doesn't forge a signature with a steady hand. A victim doesn't hold a knife to his wife's throat and use her as a human shield. I looked at the jury. They were listening. Some looked sympathetic. Blake was young, white, and handsome. He fit the profile of someone who deserved a second chance in their eyes. I realized then that the truth wasn't enough. I had to dismantle his character the same way I dismantled a faulty bridge. I had to show them the cracks in the steel. When the prosecutor called my name, I walked to the witness stand with the same steady gait I used to walk beam lines 50 stories in the air. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. But I wasn't there to tell a sob story. I wasn't there to cry about my broken heart or my betrayed trust. Tears make people uncomfortable. Facts make them listen. The defense attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination. He asked about my relationship with Nia, about my grief over Beatrice, about my own mental state. He wanted to make me look emotional, unstable, and vindictive. "Mr. Carter, do you not feel any sympathy for the pressure your son-in-law was under?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I leaned into the microphone. My face was a mask of stone. I didn't look at the lawyer. I looked directly at the jury. "Sympathy is an emotion," I said, my voice devoid of any inflection. "Let us talk about data." On October 4th at 7 p.m., Blake purchased 3 ounces of arsenic trioxide from an online supplier using a burner phone. He didn't buy it in a panic. He used a VPN to hide his IP address. That is calculation, not psychosis. On November 2nd, he forged a deed of trust. He practiced my signature 47 times on a legal pad we found in his desk. That is repetition, not a break from reality. On the night of the raid, he checked his watch 3 times while waiting for the loan sharks. He wasn't hallucinating. He was managing a schedule. I pulled a piece of paper from my pocket. The lethal dose of arsenic for a man of my weight is 120 milligrams. The toxicology report showed I had ingested 80 milligrams over 3 weeks. He wasn't trying to kill me in a fit of rage. He was mathematically keeping me just below the threshold of death to induce symptoms of dementia so he could steal my property. That is not insanity, sir. That is engineering. The courtroom went silent. I saw the jurors' faces change. The sympathy evaporated, replaced by a cold realization. They weren't looking at a sick boy anymore. They were looking at a predator. Blake stared at me, his mask slipping, his eyes filled with the same hatred I had seen in the basement. I held his gaze. I let him see that his narrative had just crashed against the wall of my logic. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman did not look at the defense table. That was the tell. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap as the judge asked for the verdict. In the matter of the State versus Blake Anderson on the charge of attempted first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, guilty. On the charge of wire fraud and elder abuse, guilty. Blake let out a sound like a deflating tire. He slumped forward, his head hitting the table. But the judge wasn't finished. "Mr. Anderson, your actions were not only criminal, they were heinous. You preyed on the vulnerable, you betrayed the sacred trust of family. You attempted to weaponize the legal system against your victim. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Blake screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound. He was dragged out of the courtroom by 3 bailiffs, kicking and shouting that it wasn't fair that he was the victim. I watched him go, and I felt nothing. No joy, no relief, just the satisfaction of a load-bearing wall finally being removed safely. Then it was Nia's turn. She stood up, her lawyer gripping her arm to keep her steady. She looked thin and pale, the scar on her neck a jagged reminder of her husband's love. She looked at me, her eyes begging for a miracle I could not give her. Nia Anderson, the judge, said, his voice softer but no less firm. You were not the architect of this plan, but you were the foundation that allowed it to stand. You watched your father being poisoned and you did nothing. You facilitated a crime that nearly ended a life. For the charges of conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder, I sentence you to 12 years in a state penitentiary. Nia didn't scream. She just collapsed. She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. She looked back at me one last time as the bailiff approached her with the handcuffs. "Daddy," she mouthed. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I didn't wave. I didn't mouth anything back. I turned my back on the court, on the weeping woman who used to be my daughter, and on the empty chair where a monster had sat. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. The air tasted clean. The trial was over. The books were balanced, and I had a bus to catch. The for sale sign didn't stay on the lawn for 24 hours. In a gentrifying neighborhood, a historic brownstone with original woodwork goes fast, even if it was the scene of a federal crime. I sold it to a nice young couple from the West Coast. They talked about raising kids there, about the good energy of the place. I didn't correct them. I didn't tell them about the arsenic invisible in the dining room rug, or the bullet hole in the basement drywall that I had patched and painted over myself. I let them have their illusion, because illusions are what sell houses. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. My footsteps echoed against the bare walls, sounding like gunshots in a canyon. I went to the kitchen where Nia had watched me eat poisoned soup. I felt nothing. No nostalgia. No sadness. Just the cold clarity of a man who knows that a house is just wood and brick held together by tension and compression. Without trust, it is structurally unsound. I went to the basement. The new steel door I had installed was still there, a monument to my survival. I touched the cold metal. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a mausoleum for the man I used to be. I signed the closing papers on the kitchen island, leaving the keys for the new owners. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I didn't want to remember the garden Beatrice loved. I didn't want to remember the porch where I taught Nia to tie her shoes. I wanted to burn the blueprints and start over on a blank sheet. With the money from the sale, plus the untouched millions in my secret accounts, I went shopping. But I didn't buy another house. I didn't want roots. I wanted wheels. I bought a 45-foot luxury RV. It was a beast of engineering with solar panels, satellite internet, and a kitchen better than the one I just sold. It was freedom made of chrome and steel. I drove it to the old tenement building on 4th Street. Mrs. Higgins was waiting on the curb, sitting on her floral suitcase. She had sold her apartment too. She said the neighborhood had too many ghosts now and the rent was getting too high for a fixed income. We weren't lovers. We were two old soldiers who had survived the same war. She looked at the RV and let out a low whistle, shaking her head. "You are trying to show off Reggie," she said, climbing into the passenger seat. I smiled for the first time in months. "I am not showing off," I said, starting the engine. "I am just making sure the suspension can handle us." She laughed, a dry, raspy sound that made the cab feel warmer. We had a map spread out on the dashboard. No destination, just lines on paper. We talked about seeing the Grand Canyon. We talked about eating lobster in Maine. We talked about everything except the people we left behind in prison cells. We had an understanding. We didn't look in the rearview mirror. We only looked through the windshield. She was the only person in the world who knew the whole truth. She was the one who handed me the key. She was the one who slapped me awake when I wanted to die. She wasn't blood, but she was more family than the people who shared my DNA. As we hit the highway, the city skyline began to shrink behind us. I watched the skyscrapers turn into toys and then disappear into the smog. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The road stretched out ahead of us, a gray ribbon of possibility. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the hum of the engine vibrating through my arms. It felt powerful. It felt like life. I thought about Blake sitting in a concrete box, realizing that his arrogance was his cage. I thought about Nia waking up every day for the next 12 years knowing she traded her father for a lie. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy, and I needed my energy for the road. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The arsenic was gone from my blood. The betrayal was gone from my heart. I was 71 years old and I was an orphan of my own making, but I had never felt more alive. Beatrice would have liked this. She always wanted to travel. I like to think she is riding shotgun right next to Mrs. Higgins, pointing out the landmarks. I looked at Mrs. Higgins dozing in the seat beside me, her mouth slightly open, snoring softly. That was peace. That was trust. People tell you that family is everything. They tell you that blood is thicker than water. They are wrong. Blood is just biology. Family is the person who hands you a rusty key when you are locked out of your own life. Family is the person who pulls you out of the dirt when you are poisoned. Family are the people who do not let you die in the dark. I had lost a child, but I had found a life. I turned up the radio, let the window down to feel the wind on my face, and drove straight into the horizon. The bridge was behind me, the road was ahead, and I was finally driving it on my own terms. I spent 40 years building bridges, but I learned that the most dangerous cracks are the ones you ignore in your own foundation. We are taught that family is a sanctuary, but sometimes it is just a cage with familiar faces. True loyalty is not inherited, it is earned through action. If someone is poisoning your peace, cut them loose even if they share your last name. You are not a burden to be managed or an asset to be liquidated. You are the architect of your own life. Do not be afraid to tear down the walls to find the sun again. If my story gave you the courage to check your own foundations, hit that like button and subscribe for more truth. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Nia, or did she get exactly what she deserved?